In this video, I'm going to get into something that I discuss in the book, Lessons from My Masters, and that is the use of the string. And the reason is because this is actually a very profound exercise that trains you how to move within your body to be able to control and kind of manipulate space. So in the book Attack Proof, we called it isolation. And I'm not saying it's a bad word, but it really doesn't capture what's really going on. And what it is within your sphere of influence, what you're doing is, as you're moving certain ways, you're actually able to manipulate the space between yourself, your hands, or another person. So for example, if I'm touching the bag, say for example, between myself and the bag, as I'm moving back and forth without exerting any force, I'm manipulating the space between myself and the bag. In other videos, I've shown how you can use a ball, whereas, this is basically like a 4-pound ball, where you could do the same thing, whereas I can hold the ball in a position and then move my body back and forth, side to side, whatever I want to do. And the idea behind that is, as I'm moving back and forth, I'm trying to isolate and keep the ball in the same spot so that all of the work that's being done internally is by my body. So obviously, if I'm holding the ball because it's got weight to it, my arm has to be working to hold it in this position. Whereas the rest of my body actually has to be playing off of that, or creating like this polarity in my movement so that I can keep the ball still. One of the reasons why I like using the ball as well is because of the fact that it gives your brain something to focus on. And also, if the ball starts moving, you can actually visually see it and kind of know if you're moving the ball, which obviously you're trying not to do that. So as I'm moving back and forth, I'm trying to keep that ball in the same spot. The idea behind it is, so if I'm moving with a person and I'm making contact as I'm trying to get past them or whatever the case may be, I can vary the amount of force I can apply, which whether I'm using a lot of force, a little force, but what I'm doing is as I'm playing off their body or even getting the shadow impression, I have this ability to control my body internally. So for example, if I'm standing like this, keeping my hands still, because I have this ability to do this, I can kind of move my body around and keep the rest of my hands and my arms in the same position. This is what allows me, so when I make contact with somebody for a microsecond, to change kind of the alignment or change the attitude of my body, as I talk about in the book, Lessons from My Masters, that gives me the ability to be able to get offline quickly. Because here's the thing, if a person is stronger than me, I'm not stopping a push or a strike per se. But if I can get offline slightly, even if they're stronger, I don't have to push them to be able to move myself. It's kind of like doing dips or push-ups. When you do push-ups, right, you don't push the earth away, you push you away. I mean, if you can push the earth away, then you're Superman and you don't need anybody's stuff. Same thing when I'm doing dips. I'm not pushing the bar away, I'm pushing me away as I'm doing the dips. Or if I'm doing pull-ups, I'm not pulling the bar down, I'm pulling me up. So it's the same kind of effect where I can push me away, so even if they're stronger, they can't affect my body. One of the things though I found is this exercise that Grandmaster Perkins had me do, where you're using a string. And so what I've done is I've just hung a string. This is just 550 cord. You can buy this at Home Depot. It's really cheap. You get like 500 feet of this stuff. And then I just put this ring on the bottom to give it a little weight. You can use almost anything that has a little bit of weight because you want a little bit of tension on the string. So I use one of these rings here, one of the Kung Fu Hung Gar rings. I love these things. And, this is another use, but you could use something like a plumb bob. I actually had a plumb bob. I don't know what I do with it, but you can use a plumb bob. You can use, a screw, a bolt, anything that's got a little bit of weight. And you don't necessarily have to use 550 cord. You can even use lighter string. But the idea is you want to then make contact with the string lightly. And then what you want to do, position yourself. So in this case, I'm going to just position myself kind of in the L stance. And what I want to do is, I want to first move forward and move back, and trying not to disturb the string, or as much as possible. So if I touch it, obviously there's a little bit of tension on the string. But as I move forward, what I don't want to do is I don't want the string to do this. Because then that shows as I'm moving forward that I'm pushing the string and I'm really not isolating too much. I'm not saying that's a bad idea per se, but it's not really what you're trying to achieve. That's easy to do. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to develop this ability to step in, step out, step around, and kind of keep my hand in the same position. Eventually, you switch off and you do the other hand. And you want to do this with both your arms because you're going to actually feel a slight difference in how your arms perform. I mean, we're human, but our arms in a fight, while they are equal, there are slight differences depending on if you're right-handed or left-handed. So as I'm doing this, I'm trying to go back and forth, trying not to disturb the string, moving in all these different positions. And what I'm doing is I'm internally training myself to be as light as possible, where I can actually feel myself internally, my joints, my muscles working, where I'm manipulating the space between myself and whatever it is, or whoever I'm dealing with. Eventually, you start doing the same thing, where then I start feeling my hands without pushing, going up and down, feeling the contour of the string. And what I'm doing here is I'm just training myself that even with the lightest contact, I can skim along the surface and move around whatever object I'm dealing with. And the reason you want to develop that skill is because this kind of skimming, sliding kind of activity, what you're doing is you're feeling the different ridges on a person's body. You know, your wrist, your hand, your elbow, you know, your shoulder, all those have different shapes to them. And we can actually train ourselves to be able to recognize those things. So as I'm moving back and forth on the string, I'm just training myself to be as light as possible. So one thing I'm going to demonstrate here, it's kind of hard to see on the video, so I'll try to explain what I'm doing. I like to put my hand on it where my fingers are lightly touching, but the string is going to go in this part before my knuckles. And what I'm doing is, as I move my hand forward, I'm actually going to follow the contour now of my arm and move my arm in a way whereas the joints or the ridges don't catch. So for example, if I'm moving my hand forward and I don't take into consideration that my knuckles are curved outward, what happens is it pushes the string. Hopefully you can see that. I'll do it again. So as I'll actually do it on this side, it might be a little clearer. So as I'm going forward, if my hand is slightly going around it, the string stays relatively in the same spot. But if I'm going forward and my knuckle catches it, you see what happened there. So all I'm doing is going forward, but you can see how it gets caught up. So I'm trying to train myself to slide around that. So as I'm here, I want to be able to then eventually slide up where the wrist, now I notice that the wrist bone is right there. So if I just keep going forward, see the wrist is going to catch it. So what I'm doing here is, now that I feel it on my wrist, I'm going to slide my arm inward to get around that and then get back. Now, because my forearm gets thicker as you get closer to the elbow, if I keep going straight, what happens is it starts pushing the string because the outer circumference, so to speak, or the outer contour, rather, of the arm is curved outward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the arm, and you can see what I'm doing here. Pull the arm inward, let it slide. Now, because it's getting close to the elbow, because it now gets narrower, then I'm actually going to go toward it. So it's kind of hard to describe when you're watching it in the video, but hopefully you get the idea. So as I'm doing this, what I'm doing is I'm just training myself to be able to follow the contours of my own body. But what I'm also doing is, as I'm following these contours, as I'm moving, I'm internally feeling the adjustments I have to make within my body, because you can feel it immediately. The beauty of using the string, like I said, another genius invention of Grandmaster Perkins, is the fact that the string gives you immediate feedback. And this is important because you know immediately whether you're doing it wrong or right. And then you can correct yourself. You know, and I want to point out, when you're practicing any of these exercises, and this just goes for any exercise we do in Warrior Flow, you want to focus also on the process, not just, you know, the end result. The end result will come. The reason is, it's within the process as you're going through it. That's where you're figuring out what works best for your body, because everybody's body is slightly different. You know, this is one of the things I believe that really separates Warrior Flow from other arts. We're not trying to take people and force everybody into the same box. So for example, a person who has thicker arms than myself, they have to move their arm a little more to get around the string to achieve the same effect. A person whose arms are not as thick or their joints are not as prominent, you know, they don't have to do it as much, but they still have to do it within their own body, because what you're doing is training your own body to do that. You can take this same idea, and then when you start washing the body, washing the arms, apply the same principle, whereas you're being as light as possible, but you're trying to be as smooth, where you're not pushing or forcing against it. So the string has tremendous applications. Eventually you start getting into the habit of, I touch and then I feel myself slipping past. See what I'm doing here? So as I'm slipping past, I can feel my hand rotating as I'm protecting my throat around this, or protecting my eyes, but I'm not pushing it. Because if I want to redirect someone, if I push them, then they're going to respond to it. But if I can slip past quickly without really disturbing their body, then it gives me a huge advantage. It almost creates the illusion like you disappear. The other thing I like to do when I'm practicing this is also this idea of, as I'm slipping around, kind of answering the phone like Grandmaster Perkins used to. But what I'm doing is as I'm slipping past, I'm feeling the contour of my own arm going against the string. My shirt's getting caught up there, but so what? So be it. And what's happening is I can feel myself as I'm sliding, getting my arm into a position. A lot of times when you do that, what I can tell you that the string is going to move a little bit, especially if you're wearing, you know, like a shirt. And don't get crazy about it. What you should be focused on is, even if there's a little tension, say for example, whatever, there's a little bend on it, you know, I look at this as equal pressure. Then I want to maintain that same pressure. In other words, if I put some pressure on it, I'll try to see, make sure you can see this, let's steady the string. Okay, so you can obviously see there's a bend in the string. As I go forward, I want to maintain this relationship then. In other words, by using equal pressure and maintaining a relationship relative to the person and what they're experiencing, it feels to them like it's the same thing. So hopefully this kind of provides some guidance for you of how you can practice this. Of course, my dogs want to come in because, you know, they're all upset because they don't get a chance to like mess with the ring, because I won't let them mess with the ring because they do all kinds of weird stuff to it. So hopefully this gives you an idea of how you can practice this.